You know, recently I was actually approached by a grade 1-2 split class through their principal, Jasmine Marshman from Henderson Elementary in Powell River. They were very concerned about the lack of safe drinking water in First Nations communities across Canada because they had seen information about the Auditor General's report. And they were so motivated that they actually wrote multiple letters to the Prime Minister and made sure that I also received a copy of those so that their voices could be heard. And I think it's quite telling when a grade 1-2 class in Powell River is willing to stand up and talk about this. And they want to hear more about what you're going to do about it and what this government is going to do about it. And I appreciate there has been some success, but we saw in the Auditor General's report that very clearly there still isn't enough support. And the high risk assessment, medium and high risk assessment of water systems, the percentage still stays around 43%. So even with the successes, there's still these continual things popping up, which means Indigenous people continue to face the challenge. And I always think of one of the chiefs in my riding who said, what we continue to see with levels of government is incremental justice. So a little bit of justice when it's convenient. And I think that this is something that really we need to look at. So I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the plans that your department may have around updating operations and maintenance funding formulas. We know that those were developed 30 years ago and can't possibly reflect the advances in technology, actual cost of maintenance. And I think that's important because what we're hearing from Indigenous communities, from First Nations communities, is that their water system operators are being paid 30% less than folks in other places. And this is an ongoing concern of not having the amount of resources that they need to legitimately start the system, making sure that the regulatory process is clear and consistent and makes sense to everyone. I hear your resistance around the legislative framework, but we need something stronger than this. And obviously not paying people right and looking at systems from a 30 years ago window frame. I'm just wondering if you could speak to that.
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you for that. You'll note that with the lifting of the Wet'suwet'en long-term water advisory, that leaves only one left in BC, and we're cautiously optimistic about that in the next little while, and it'll be something really to celebrate and lift up. Look, clearly, there are a number of elements in the Auditor General's report that are very compelling. When I was named minister about 15 months ago, I sat down with my team and said, there may be elements that perhaps don't fall, strictly speaking, into the context of lifting a long-term water advisory that we need to address through additional funding, through a number of other elements. This is before COVID hit, and so I asked my team to sit down and come up with what that might look like. And what came back with a lot of the engagement was obviously the O&M, the operations and maintenance of what is a critical water asset. What communities were telling us was important to hit to get to the deadline of lifting all the water advisories. I think that is something that is important for all First Nations, whether they're on long-term water advisories or not. But a lot of the questions that would come with that was, well, what are you going to do after March 2021? Where are you going to be? Are you going to disappear like you did before? These all kind of turn around very important points that you raised, which is around the deficiency in the funding model, which was for the benefit of everyone, was an 80-20 model where the government would give 80% and 20% the community would be asked contribute. And with a state-of-the-art asset like a plant, particularly some of the new ones that are being built, the people in there need to get, as you said, equal pay for equal work. And those people are the pride of their communities. And you can't blame someone if they want to go somewhere else or if they get pulled into another community, which is often non-Indigenous, paying them more. It just isn't fair. And so there was a lot of discussions around the funding model and making sure there was more of a perpetual funding model that would allow us to fix the O&M gap, because it contributes precisely to that point you said, which is the insecurity and the risk model and profile that the Auditor General looked at. When I saw the medium to high risk category, that risk is with respect to the integrity of the asset, because it is threatened through people that aren't paid properly, through people that have to, through perhaps cutting corners to get people to work there. That integrity of a critical asset puts it at risk. So there's some issues with the sensitivity of what that is measuring, because it's not as if you're looking at crumbling infrastructure. You're looking at all You're looking at all the investment and maintenance in and around a critical asset system for a community. So those are aspects that perhaps fall outside what would be taken to lift a long-term water advisory, i.e. producing safe and clean water, but they are so critical to the lifespan and the asset span of a plant, for example. And they weren't necessarily addressed in prior funding models. And so the announcement in December or late November of $1.5 billion was, yes, designed to address some of the challenges and the costing of dealing with a global pandemic and increased costs in what we might do to support communities that want to build through a pandemic, but also that O&M, which is so critical and that you raised. So it is part of a greater approach to water safety and integrity that was addressed a few months later in the Auditor General's report, and it's something that I'm glad we're moving forward on. There's still more work to do, but at least in terms of financial support and telling communities that the government of Canada is there for them, that funding is there, and it just has to be rolled out over the coming months.